Imagine a world where a message couldn't be sent with a single tap, where news traveled not by screen, not by wire, but by footsteps, hoofbeats, and the steady breath of a determined messenger moving across winding roads. A world where every letter had weight, not just the ink on the page, but the journey itself, stretching across forests, mountains, rivers, and unfamiliar towns. A world where the simple act of delivering a message required endurance, planning, trust, and quiet bravery. Tonight on Boring History for Sleep, we'll drift into that world. A time when messengers carried more than words. They carried the connections that held entire kingdoms together. They rode through misty valleys, walked lonely paths, rested beneath quiet trees, and followed routes shaped by weather, terrain, and the soft rhythm of human patience. Communication moved slowly, but meaningfully. Every message felt intentional, precious, and alive. Before we begin this calm journey through distances and old roads, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. Your support helps keep these peaceful bedtime stories alive. Now, get comfortable, breathe softly, and let the footsteps of history lead you into the night. When imagining how messengers once delivered letters across entire kingdoms, it helps to begin with the very first moment of the journey, when a message was written, folded, sealed, and placed gently into someone's hands. Before any footsteps, before any roads, before any long days or quiet nights on the move, there was this soft beginning. A single sheet of parchment holding words that mattered enough to travel far beyond the place they were written. And for the messenger receiving it, that moment marked the start of a path that might carry them across fields, through forests, down riverbanks, along stones laid by distant generations, and into towns where few people knew their name. In medieval Europe, messages weren't sent casually. Writing itself took effort, ink mixed by hand, quills trimmed carefully, parchment prepared from weeks of work. So when someone finally wrote a letter, it held intention. It wasn't a passing thought or a quick update. It was something someone truly needed another person to know. And when the writer sealed the message with warm wax and pressed a simple emblem into it, they were placing trust in the messenger who would carry it. The message might be short or long, personal or official, urgent or ordinary, but it mattered enough to send across miles of unpredictable land. A messenger receiving such a letter would accept it with quiet understanding. They knew the weight of responsibility, not heavy in their hands, but steady in their mind. Delivering messages was not merely a task. It was a connection between distant places. Their journey linked homes separated by rivers, markets separated by forests, villages divided by hills, and people whose paths would never cross except through written words. This role required reliability, calmness, and endurance, traits grown over years of moving across familiar and unfamiliar routes. Before setting out, a messenger often prepared in small but meaningful ways. They checked their shoes or boots, ensuring the soles were ready for long walks. They tied their cloak securely, ready for wind or unexpected weather. They checked the pouch where the letter would rest, always kept close, often tucked behind layers of cloth to protect it from dampness or loss. They might take a small piece of food, a flask of water, or a coil of string or cloth in case repairs were needed along the way. These preparations were simple, quiet rituals, repeated so many times they became instinctive. Then came the departure, not dramatic, not rushed, but steady. A messenger stepped outside, feeling the first breath of the road ahead. Whether they began at dawn or dusk, they carried with them a sense of direction shaped by habit and experience. Messengers often knew the land in ways that maps, if they existed at all, could not fully express. They learned which paths stayed firm after a rain, which footbridges felt safest, which meadows stayed dry even in the early morning. They knew where travelers often stopped to rest, where streams flowed gently enough to drink from, where small inns or farmhouses welcomed weary visitors. Their knowledge wasn't written but lived, gathered through countless journeys, observed through careful attention, remembered through subtle signs in the landscape. The beginning miles of a journey might pass through familiar places. A messenger could walk past homes they'd seen many times, fields they'd watched change with the seasons, or small markers left intentionally along the road by other travelers. A smooth stone, a carved tree, a weathered post. These early steps grounded them, easing them into the rhythm of travel. The message rested safely against their chest or side, its presence felt but not burdensome. As they left the boundaries of home and moved toward the wide stretches of land between villages, sound changed. The quiet hum of daily life faded into natural rhythms. Distant birds, the rustle of leaves, footsteps on dirt or grass, the faint whisper of a breeze brushing against their cloak. These subtle sounds became the background to every journey, steady companions across the shifting landscapes of the kingdom. Messengers rarely rushed, because rushing wasted energy. They walked with a purposeful, even pace, choosing steps that they could maintain for hours. They understood that endurance mattered far more than speed. Whether a message took 1 day or 3, the important thing was that it arrived safely, dry, unbroken, unlost. Their pace became almost meditative, allowing their thoughts to drift gently like the scenery around them. This calm approach to distance turned long paths into manageable stretches, each step reinforcing the quiet routine of travel. Sometimes a messenger traveled alone. Other times, they met fellow travelers on the road. Farmers heading to market, shepherds guiding flocks, merchants pushing carts or leading pack animals, and occasional travelers moving from one town to another. These encounters were often brief, but they offered a small comfort. A nod, a shared greeting, a brief exchange about the weather or the condition of the road could lighten the spirit. Travel, even when solitary, rarely felt lonely. The roads carried countless footsteps, and each traveler added familiarity to paths that stretched far beyond any single village. As distances lengthened, the landscape began to shift. A messenger might move from flat open fields into rolling hills, or from farmland into the shaded paths of a forest. Each environment brought its own pace. In open fields, the wind might carry scents of grain or grass, and the horizon felt broad, giving a sense of quiet possibility. In forests, the air was cooler, the light softer, filtered through layers of leaves. The ground gave underfoot with a muted softness, turning footsteps into gentle impressions in the earth. Crossing bridges or streams required extra care. Medieval bridges might be simple wooden ones, worn by rain and time. Streams without bridges required stepping stones or shallow crossings. Messengers learned where water flowed gently and where it ran too quickly to attempt a crossing. These moments of careful judgment shaped the journey, guiding choices not recorded in any written guide. Though the messenger carried only a single message, the journey felt purposeful. They were, in a small way, connecting distant pieces of a much larger world. Villages separated by days of travel felt closer because someone carried words between them. Family news, trading agreements, announcements, simple greetings, all moved through the hands of people like this messenger. As days shifted toward evening, the messenger might seek shelter. Inns existed along major roads, offering travelers a place to rest, eat, and warm themselves. Smaller paths might have no inns at all, so a messenger relied on hospitable farmhouses or sheltered natural spots where they could sleep safely. Rest, like travel, was quiet and practical. A messenger needed sleep, not luxury. They often rested with the letter close to them, tucked safely against the body or within easy reach. Waking at dawn, they resumed their journey with renewed steps. The colors of the morning, pale blues, soft pinks, muted golds, painted the land in gentle tones. Birds stirred. Mist sometimes hovered above fields or rivers. In these early hours, messengers often felt a deep sense of calm. The road was theirs alone, stretching ahead like a long, patient companion. As the journey continued into new regions, the messenger noticed subtle differences: accents, architecture, clothing styles, the way fields were arranged, the types of goods sold in small markets. Though kingdoms were unified under a single rule, they were diverse in ways travel revealed slowly, step by step. Messengers witnessed these changes more than most people, becoming quiet observers of how life shifted gently across distances. Delivering a message was not only about reaching a place, it was also about finding the right person. A messenger arriving in a town would ask for directions, describe the recipient, and follow local guidance to the correct home, shop, office, or farm. Once they arrived, the moment of delivery had its own quiet significance. The sealed letter passed from one hand to another. The messenger's role was fulfilled. They had carried someone's words safely across miles of differing landscapes, through weather, over roads shaped by time and use. Sometimes the journey ended quickly. Sometimes it continued, branching into new routes as the messenger was entrusted with additional tasks. But each delivery created a small connection between distant places, stitching the kingdom together with handwritten threads of communication. In this way, Chapter 1 shows us that before exploring the longer systems of roads, relays, riders, and networks, the heart of medieval message delivery began with a single, simple moment: a letter placed into a messenger's care. The journey that followed was shaped by nature, endurance, habit, and quiet determination. Distance wasn't a barrier. It was a path walked step by step, shaped by experience and trust. When imagining how messengers delivered letters across entire kingdoms, it's easy to picture them simply walking from one place to another. But in truth, their journeys were shaped just as much by the land beneath their feet as by the message in their hands. The roads, tracks, footpaths, riverbanks, and crossings they followed formed a quiet, vast web of routes that allowed news to travel steadily through the heart of medieval Europe. These paths were not built all at once, nor were they always carefully planned. Instead, they grew naturally across generations, shaped by footsteps, by hooves, by wheels, by weather, and by the needs of people moving through space long before maps captured the lines. To understand how these routes supported messengers, imagine yourself stepping onto a medieval road. It is not smooth, paved, or precisely measured. It is a living surface that carries the memory of countless travelers. A rutted path where carts have passed, a soft trail where shepherds move their flocks, narrow footpaths worn into the earth by villagers walking to markets or mills. Roads were not straight. They curved around fields, streams, and hills, following the logic of the land rather than any geometric plan. Messengers learned these roads not by reference, but by experience, by walking them in summer and winter, learning their character, their challenges, and their quiet guidance. The main roads between large towns were broader and more established. Many originated from older routes stretching back through generations. Kingdoms relied on these main arteries as stable lines of travel for trade, officials, travelers, and messengers alike. But even these were not guaranteed smooth. Rain turned dirt into slick mud. Dry weather cracked surfaces into uneven ridges. Stones shifted underfoot. Ruts deepened until carts struggled to pass. A messenger moving along such a road had to read the ground constantly, stepping where the earth felt stable, avoiding deep impressions, finding firmer soil near the edges. Smaller paths carried their own rhythms. Some were only wide enough for a single traveler. Others branched unexpectedly, splitting toward villages or farms. Messengers had to know which branches led where, often relying on memory rather than signs, for medieval roads rarely had markers. Instead, landmarks served as silent guides: a distinctive tree, a large stone, a bend in a stream, the shape of a hill. These natural features remained constant even when seasons changed the appearance of the path itself. One of the quiet skills messengers learned was reading the land as if it were a map. They recognized direction by the sun's movement, by the shape of distant hills, by the sound of water, and even by the type of soil beneath their feet. Soft ground hinted at a nearby stream. Dry, firm earth often marked roads leading toward busier settlements. Gravel paths indicated routes well traveled by carts. These subtle signs guided them across spaces where no written instructions existed. Bridges in medieval Europe were important points of crossing, and messengers knew them well. Some bridges were made of stone, sturdy, reliable, crafted with care. Others were simple structures of wood, responsive to weather and prone to wear. During storms or floods, bridges might become impassable, forcing messengers to seek alternative crossings. Shallow fords, where water flowed gently over stones, provided natural points to cross rivers. A messenger who knew the land well could judge the safety of a ford by sound alone. The gentler the flow, the more likely the crossing was manageable. In forests, the paths narrowed further. Light filtered through branches and leaves. Footsteps softened on moss or fallen leaves. Forest roads required attention, for roots could catch a boot, branches could obscure visibility, and small animals rustling in the undergrowth reminded travelers that this was a shared space between humans and nature. Yet forests also offered shelter from wind and sun, making travel there both challenging and comforting. Along coastlines or rivers, paths followed the natural curves of the water. These routes provided orientation and sometimes easier walking, though tides, wet sand, or shifting ground required caution. Messengers often preferred river paths because settlements tended to cluster near water. A riverbank route might pass multiple towns or villages, providing opportunities for rest, food, or fresh water. Elevation also shaped communication. In hilly or mountainous regions, messengers climbed slowly, pacing themselves to conserve energy. Uphill travel demanded endurance. Downhill travel required care to avoid slipping. Mountain passes, though narrow or steep, often connected regions more directly than long detours around large landforms. A messenger familiar with these passes could shorten their journey significantly. Weather played a constant role in shaping the road beneath a messenger's feet. Rain transformed dirt into heavy mud that clung to boots. Snow softened paths until footsteps became impressions rather than steady placing. Fog obscured landmarks, requiring messengers to rely on memory and instinct. Wind could push against cloaks and hoods, slowing travel on exposed ridges. Yet experienced messengers moved calmly through all of it, adjusting their stride, resting when needed, and proceeding with the quiet confidence that came from knowing the land. Travel at night changed the relationship to the road entirely. Many messengers avoided night travel unless necessary, for visibility was limited and the world felt larger and more unpredictable. But when they did travel by moonlight, the landscape shifted into gentle shapes and silhouettes. Roads glowed faintly under the sky, and the messenger's steps became deliberate, coordinated with the faint light and the sounds of distant insects or flowing water. Trees became outlines. Stones cast slight shadows. Even the stars offered subtle orientation to those who knew how to read them. Travel between regions also meant crossing boundaries, not marked by signs, but by subtle changes in architecture, in the layout of fields, in the types of fences, in the sound of dialects drifting from nearby homes. Messengers learned to sense these differences as indicators of where they stood within the kingdom. A change in landscape might signal that a different authority maintained the roads. A shift in stone type or soil color hinted at a new region. These nuanced observations anchored their place in the wider geography. Despite the challenges, the medieval road system worked surprisingly well for its time. It was flexible, shaped by countless travelers, and deeply connected to the land. Messengers moved through this system not as outsiders, but as part of its quiet flow. They became extensions of the roads themselves, familiar with the smallest bends, the most reliable paths, the safest crossings, and the quiet resting spots where travelers paused to recover. Rest itself was important. Along major roads, inns provided shelter, warmth, and simple meals. Some offered stables for animals if the messenger rode. Smaller paths had fewer inns, so travelers often relied on the hospitality of households or the shelter of trees and rock formations. Rest restored a messenger's pace and clarity. Sleep was not always deep or long, but it offered enough strength to continue. The presence of roads also influenced how messages moved across kingdoms. Where roads were well maintained, communication flowed more quickly. Where roads were rough or weather-beaten, messages slowed. This made the geography of the kingdom more than physical. It shaped the tempo of information itself. A message might reach a nearby town within hours, yet take days to reach distant regions separated by forests or mountains. Messengers understood these variations and adjusted their journeys accordingly. Throughout these travels, the messenger's steps formed part of a much larger pattern, a pattern of movement connecting villages to towns, towns to cities, and cities to distant borders. The medieval road network wasn't simply infrastructure, it was the kingdom's circulatory system, quietly carrying the lifeblood of communication, trade, and human connection. When we think of medieval messengers, it is easy to imagine a single traveler walking from one end of a kingdom to the other, carrying a letter over fields, forests, and countless miles. And sometimes, that simple image was true. But as kingdoms grew larger, as towns multiplied, and as rulers needed information to move more quickly than footsteps alone would allow, another system quietly took shape: a relay network. Relay networks were not dramatic, nor were they built in a moment. They developed slowly, shaped by necessity, distance, and the quiet ingenuity of people who understood that messages could travel faster if the journey was shared. Instead of one messenger crossing the entire kingdom alone, the journey was divided into smaller segments, each handled by someone familiar with that stretch of road. In this way, the message moved almost continuously, handed from one person to the next like a soft thread carried along unseen hands. To understand how relay networks worked, imagine the kingdom as a long, winding path connecting distant towns, villages, castles, and riverside settlements. Along these paths stood small stations, not grand buildings, not official posts, but simple places where one messenger might rest while another took the letter forward. Sometimes these stations were inns. Sometimes they were farms, crossroads, small watchhouses, or even designated families known to support travelers. There was no single formula. Instead, the system grew from habit, cooperation, and shared understanding among communities. A relay journey began the moment a letter left its origin. The first messenger carried it across the initial distance, moving steadily toward the first handoff point. This might take hours or a full day, depending on terrain and weather. Upon arrival, the letter did not necessarily rest, but the messenger could. Another person, already prepared, took the letter and continued down the next stretch of road. This simple exchange created momentum, allowing the message to travel further in a shorter time than one person walking could manage. These relay messengers often lived close to their assigned route. They knew the road intimately, where it curved, where mud gathered, where travelers could find shade, where storms struck hardest. Their familiarity allowed them to move quickly and safely, reducing delays and protecting the message from harm. Some messengers rode horses for even greater speed. Others walked swiftly with practiced endurance. A letter moving through a relay could cover impressive distances, not because roads were easy and not because each messenger moved faster than human limits allowed, but because the message itself did not rest. While one messenger slept, another was already carrying the letter forward. While one route awaited sunrise for safe travel, another might still be bright enough to continue. The kingdom's geography shaped the rhythm, but people shaped the continuity. Relay networks required quiet teamwork. Messengers trusted one another without ceremony. A handoff might last only a moment. A shared glance, a brief greeting, a soft, "You carry it from here." There were no formal uniforms or official marks, just a shared purpose: move the message forward. Even today, when we track packages across networks or watch information flow between servers, we are watching modern versions of this medieval idea. Movement carried through many hands or stations so that the journey is faster and steadier than any single path could allow. The relay system also required coordination. Towns often kept track of who was available to carry messages. Larger settlements designated people who were known for reliability or endurance. In some regions, mounted couriers waited at staging points with horses ready for swift movement. These riders could cover long distances within a day, especially on well-traveled roads. Their speed gave rulers an important advantage. News could reach them more quickly, and their orders could travel outward with similar efficiency. But relays were not only for official messages. Merchants, families, travelers, and communities also benefited from the shared movement of information. When a letter needed to cross a long distance, the relay network provided a practical, resilient option. Its existence made large kingdoms feel smaller, connecting distant corners into a coherent whole. One of the most fascinating aspects of relay networks was how natural and decentralized they were. Unlike later postal systems with centralized control, medieval relays often functioned through community understanding. People knew their place in the network not by order, but by routine. A messenger might say, "I carry letters from my town to the river crossing," or "My route runs from the mill to the next 3 villages." This local familiarity ensured that even without maps, without strict rules, without schedules printed on walls, the message found its way like water flowing along connected streams. Horses played a quiet but important role in many relays. Riders could move more quickly than walkers, especially on longer routes. But caring for horses required resources: food, water, shelter. So mounted relays developed mostly along major roads and regions with greater infrastructure. Riders timed their pace to preserve the horse's strength, knowing that endurance mattered more than speed. A tired horse risked injury, and an injured horse meant delays. So riders adopted techniques that balanced speed with care, allowing letters to travel swiftly yet safely. Each relay point carried its own atmosphere. Some were busy, with travelers coming and going, sharing news, exchanging goods, and resting their animals. Others were small, quiet huts or homes where only a few messengers passed each day. But every relay point held significance. It represented connection, a place where one journey ended and another began. Even without ceremony, each handoff felt like a subtle continuation of something larger than the messenger or even the letter itself. Weather influenced relay rhythms. In heavy rain, muddy roads slowed movement. In snow, paths blurred, requiring messengers to rely on landmarks and memory. In summer heat, travelers paced themselves to avoid exhaustion. Relay networks adapted to these shifts. If a storm closed one route temporarily, another route might open. If one messenger fell ill or became delayed, others stepped in to fill the gap. The network was flexible, resilient, and shaped by the understanding that messages must keep moving even when circumstances changed. Travel at night required special care. Some relays paused after dusk, waiting for sunrise to resume travel. Others proceeded cautiously under moonlight, guided by familiarity with the terrain. A message might travel more slowly at night, but it did not stop entirely. The relay carried it forward step by step, hour by hour. Relay networks also fostered a quiet sense of community across wide distances. A messenger handing off a letter trusted that the next person would fulfill their role. This reliance created invisible threads of cooperation stretching across entire kingdoms. People who never met still worked together indirectly, each ensuring the message reached its final destination. This cooperative structure mirrors modern systems where information, goods, or resources pass through many hands without requiring the participants to know one another personally. As messages moved, they carried not only written words, but also small traces of the journey. Dust from roads, creases from handling, warmth from being held. When a letter finally reached its destination, the recipient held something that had traveled through many lives and landscapes. This physical journey gave medieval messages a sense of presence, a tangible connection to the world beyond their door. Relay networks also influenced how rulers governed. Information that once took weeks to travel could now move in days. Decisions became more timely. Responses reached distant regions before situations changed completely. This communication rhythm allowed kingdoms to function with greater cohesion, strengthening the sense of unity across territories that might otherwise have felt isolated. But even with all this structure, the relay network remained simple at heart. It was built on human endurance, trust, local knowledge, and the steady willingness to carry words forward. No part of the system was grand. Every part was essential. As we end this chapter, the message we've been following has now traveled far from its origin, passed through multiple hands, moved across towns and landscapes, crossed bridges and paths, and continued steadily toward its destination. With each relay, the kingdom feels a little smaller, the distances a little shorter, and the idea of communication across great spaces becomes softer and more familiar. To understand how letters traveled across entire kingdoms, we must pause the journey itself and spend a quiet moment with the people who made it possible, the messengers. Not the roads, not the relay points, not the systems built slowly over generations, but the human beings whose steady footsteps, calm judgment, and quiet endurance carried words farther than most people of their time ever traveled. Messengers lived in many forms. Some were official carriers for local leaders, some worked for merchants or towns, some served as independent travelers who accepted messages as part of their work, and some were simply people trusted by their communities. They did not always see themselves as special or significant. Often, they viewed their task as practical, necessary, and woven into the everyday rhythm of life. Yet without them, long-distance communication would have been nearly impossible. A messenger's day began earlier than most, not because they sought dramatic departure, but because daylight was their ally. At first light, when the world was soft and still, they prepared quietly. They checked their shoes, ensuring the soles were intact. They tied their cloak securely, adjusting it for warmth, but leaving space for ease of movement. They reached for their satchel or pouch, often made of thick leather, where letters would rest safely through all weather. This careful preparation required no rush, only attention. Messengers knew that a calm start created a steady day. One of the defining traits of a messenger was endurance. Not speed, not bravado, but the ability to maintain a pace hour after hour. Walking, riding, or sometimes running short stretches, they balanced energy and effort. Their steps were deliberate, their breathing steady. Over time, their bodies adapted to long distances. Leg muscles strengthened from climbing hills and descending trails. Shoulders grew accustomed to carrying modest supplies. Their posture shifted subtly into one suited for long hours outdoors. Yet physical strength was only part of what made a messenger reliable. They also developed a deep familiarity with the land, something that no map, if one existed, could equal. They understood how the color of soil changed across regions, how the scent of air signaled a nearby stream, how certain trees marked long-standing paths. They recognized the feel of polished stones underfoot on well-traveled roads and the softness of moss indicating the presence of shelter within a forest. These sensory cues guided them through fog, through rain, through the dim light of dusk. Messengers learned to gauge time without clocks. They followed the sun's position, the length of shadows, the rhythm of birdsong. They knew how afternoon light softened on western slopes, how twilight lingered differently near water, how stars emerged slowly on clear evenings. This natural awareness helped them plan rest, pace, and direction even when familiar landmarks temporarily vanished. Messengers also cultivated a calm kind of alertness. Not nervousness, not fear, but careful observation. They noticed the sound of water beneath a bridge, the rustle of wind through particular trees, the softness of earth after rain. They sensed when a path might be slippery or when stepping stones across a stream needed testing. Their attentiveness allowed them to maintain safety on routes that shifted with weather and time. Because communication was their work, messengers also developed skills in memory and detail. A letter might come with spoken instructions. Deliver this to the stone house near the mill, or ask for the third home past the market square. Addresses in the modern sense were rare, so messengers relied on descriptions, landmarks, and local understanding. They remembered names, faces, and family connections, quietly building a mental network across regions. Despite their constant movement, messengers often felt a sense of belonging in many places. Inns recognized them, offering warm food and a place to sleep. Farmers greeted them with familiarity. Traders along the road nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Messengers carried not only letters, but also the soft thread of continuity between communities. Even if they didn't stay long in any one place, the road itself felt like home, a familiar companion that unfolded steadily beneath their feet. Their supplies were modest: a small flask for water, a piece of bread or dried food, perhaps a spare pair of laces, a strip of cloth for tying or repairing something, or a small blade for everyday tasks. Everything they carried had purpose. Too much weight slowed them. Too little preparation risked need. This balance of simplicity and readiness defined their lifestyle. Messengers also knew how to rest wisely. On long journeys, they paused not only when tired but when opportunity allowed. A shaded place at midday, a sheltered spot during sudden rain, a warm inn at dusk. Rest was not weakness but strategy, something that preserved their endurance for the long route ahead. Sleep came easily to messengers, often in unfamiliar places, because the body learned to relax whenever stillness presented itself. Though messengers were used to solitude, they were not alone. The road offered companionship in subtle forms: fellow travelers, animals grazing nearby, distant village sounds, the rush of rivers. Sometimes a messenger walked for hours without speaking, yet never felt isolated. The rhythm of movement created its own sense of connection to time, to land, to the purpose of the journey. Occasionally, messengers traveled in pairs or small groups, especially when carrying multiple messages or covering longer distances. These journeys allowed quiet conversation, shared observation, and mutual support. But even in groups, the tone was peaceful. Travel required energy, and unnecessary talk faded naturally into silence, broken by soft exchanges about weather, directions, or landmarks. Communication among messengers was also practical. When meeting at relay points, they exchanged small pieces of information: which road was muddy, where a bridge felt unstable, where an inn had space, where a new path had appeared. These shared observations strengthened the entire network, improving safety and speed for everyone involved. Messengers often held the trust of many people. They carried not just letters, but also small packages, payments, or essential documents. That trust was earned through consistent reliability. A messenger who returned home safely and delivered their messages correctly gained a reputation that brought more work and steady respect. Though their role was quiet, it was valued. Some messengers served their entire lives, moving along familiar routes until age guided them to slower rhythms. Others served temporarily, young people seeking opportunity, villagers helping during busy seasons, traders adding message carrying to their routine travels. Regardless of how long they served, their contributions formed part of a long chain of communication stretching across decades. The way messengers delivered a letter also reflected their character. Upon reaching a destination, they didn't rush. They approached calmly, greeted the household or the town official, and presented the message with steady hands. This gentle professionalism built trust in the system. A recipient might not know the messenger personally, but they recognized the care in the delivery. Sometimes, messengers stayed long enough to receive a response. Other times, they left immediately, continuing their journey along another route. Their schedules were flexible yet purposeful. They carried not only letters, but the invisible rhythm of movement across the kingdom. Messengers witnessed the kingdom's seasons intimately. They saw spring unfold on distant hills, summer fields golden with grain, autumn roads lined with leaves, and winter paths resting beneath frost. Few people saw the land as completely as messengers did. And though their work required endurance, they often found quiet beauty in these shifting landscapes. A sunrise painting the sky, a peaceful river crossing, a field glimmering with morning dew. Yet perhaps the most remarkable quality of medieval messengers was their consistency. They moved with quiet determination, day after day, route after route, forming the backbone of long-distance communication. Their efforts made kingdoms feel smaller, families feel connected, and information feel reachable even across vast distances. In this chapter, we come to understand that messengers were not extraordinary heroes or dramatic figures. They were ordinary people doing something essential with patience, care, and steady endurance. And it was this ordinary steadiness, repeated across countless journeys, that allowed entire kingdoms to communicate. Long before a message began its journey across forests, roads, and entire kingdoms, it existed as something small, delicate, and quietly important. A letter, not a printed sheet, not something folded by a machine, not a quick note dashed off without thought, but a carefully prepared piece of writing shaped by hands that understood its significance. In the medieval world, the letter itself held weight, physical, emotional, and practical, and how it was made determined how well it survived the long road ahead. To understand how messages traveled such great distances, we must first understand how they were created. A medieval letter began with materials that were neither quick nor simple to produce. Parchment was the most common writing surface for many centuries, a smooth sheet made from animal skin that had been soaked, stretched, scraped, and dried with patient skill. It wasn't paper in the modern sense. It carried a subtle texture, a soft firmness, and a quiet resilience that made it well suited for journeys. A piece of parchment could be bent, folded, brushed by weather, and still hold its words with surprising clarity. Ink, too, was prepared through effort. It was not purchased in small bottles, but made from natural ingredients. Soot, oak galls, iron salts, and plant extracts combined to create ink that clung to parchment with each stroke of the quill. The writing tool, usually a feather quill, needed trimming and shaping before each use. Writing was a careful process, steady and thoughtful, which made the resulting letter meaningful long before it ever left the room in which it was created. Because writing required such attention, medieval letters tended to be concise. Not abrupt or cold, but purposeful. People did not write to fill space. They wrote to convey what must be known. The tone could be warm, formal, practical, or grateful, but every word earned its place on the parchment. Once written, the letter had to be folded. Medieval folding was not merely functional, it was protective. Without envelopes, the parchment itself became its own covering. The writer folded it inward, safeguarding the writing. Some letters were folded multiple times, forming a compact packet small enough for a messenger to carry discreetly. Others remained in larger sheets, depending on the content or the sender's style. Sealing was an essential step. To close the letter securely, the sender heated wax until it softened, then let a few drops fall onto the fold. While the wax was warm, they pressed an object into it, sometimes a ring, sometimes a carved seal, sometimes a handmade imprint. This mark served several quiet purposes. It protected the letter from tampering, it confirmed its authenticity, and it lent the message a sense of formality or trust, even when communication took place across great distances. The seal told the messenger, and later the recipient, that what they held was meant specifically for them. Some seals were simple, a thumbprint pressed lightly into wax. Others bore patterns representing families, towns, or groups. Each seal held meaning, and each carried the quiet authority needed for the letter to travel smoothly. But even after sealing, the letter still required protection. Messengers knew that weather could shift suddenly. Rain could dampen parchment. Mist or dew could soften ink. For this reason, messages were often carried within containers, small leather pouches, wooden cases, cloth wraps tied securely, or special pockets sewn into clothing. A letter placed close to the body, beneath layers of wool or linen, stayed warm and dry, shielded from the elements that could harm it. The act of carrying a letter created a unique relationship between messenger and message. The letter might weigh almost nothing, yet the messenger protected it as though it were fragile. They checked it often, feeling for its presence, keeping it positioned securely so it would not shift or wrinkle unduly. This habit was instinctive, born from experience rather than instruction. A message could not be replaced. The original words mattered, and so care was constant. Some messages traveled alone. Others traveled with companions, bundles tied together if multiple letters needed to reach the same region. When merchants or officials sent several letters at once, they sometimes grouped them by route, increasing efficiency. The messenger had to know which bundle belonged to which destination, relying again on memory and attention rather than written labels. One of the more subtle aspects of medieval messages was the way they carried time. The day they were written, the day they were sealed, the day the messenger departed. Each step marked the passing of time, not through clocks or schedules, but through natural rhythm. Recipients understood this. A letter arriving after a week carried the texture of its journey, almost as if the parchment itself absorbed the landscapes it passed through. Messages also conveyed personal presence. In a world without photographs, without recordings, without rapid communication, handwritten words held emotional depth. The recipient saw the sender in the shape of letters, the pressure of strokes, the spacing of lines. A tired hand wrote differently from a rested hand. A joyful message carried lighter forms. A heavy message carried deliberate strokes. People recognized these subtle details instinctively. When a messenger finally handed the letter to its recipient, the moment held a certain softness. The exchange was simple, no ceremony, just a quiet offering. The recipient might hold the sealed packet thoughtfully for a moment, sensing its weight before opening it. Breaking the wax felt like opening a small doorway into someone else's mind, across days or even weeks of distance. Some messages required immediate responses. In such cases, the messenger might rest briefly while the recipient prepared a reply. Other times, the messenger greeted the recipient and left quickly, continuing along a route with other letters still to deliver. But regardless of whether the exchange was brief or lingering, the letter had fulfilled its purpose, connecting two distant people in a way that felt direct, human, and meaningful. The physicality of medieval letters shaped how communication felt. Modern messages travel invisibly, instantly, and often without thought. Medieval letters, by contrast, were objects, tangible, crafted, carried, protected, delivered. Their existence reminded both sender and recipient that communication required time, care, and intention. This tangibility also influenced how messages were stored. Some families kept important letters as treasured items, folded and refolded across years. Others discarded letters once their purpose was fulfilled. But no matter how long a message survived after arrival, during the journey it was treated with near constant respect. City officials and town leaders often kept sealed documents in wooden boxes or chests, arranging them by date, sender, or purpose. Understanding the organization of these messages helped them track ongoing matters. Merchants kept letters related to trade agreements, deliveries, and news from distant markets. Travelers sometimes carried personal letters tucked away as reminders of home. The diversity of messages also reflected the diversity of life. Some letters held routine information, arrangements for trade, notifications about supplies, instructions for local affairs. Others carried deeply personal content, news of family, updates about travel, invitations, or thoughtful greetings. A few letters bore urgent information meant to alter decisions across entire regions. Messengers carried them all with the same steady care. Occasionally, letters held small items tied inside: a ribbon, a pressed flower, a small charm, a sketch, or a fragment of cloth. These small additions provided emotional comfort or conveyed meaning beyond words. They traveled safely folded within the parchment, protected throughout the journey. The very nature of the letter influenced how messengers treated their surroundings. If they were carrying messages that could not be exposed to dampness, they took extra care during rain. If they carried multiple sealed packets meant for different destinations, they planned routes with precision. If they carried delicate parchment intended for important hands, they chose sheltered resting places and traveled with measured steps. As we reflect on medieval letters, we begin to understand they were more than pieces of parchment. They were physical embodiments of connection, shaped by time, material, weather, and human intention. Their journey gave them character. Their arrival gave them purpose. If we imagine messages crossing entire medieval kingdoms, we must also imagine the time they took. Not hours, not a day or two, but stretches of time long enough for seasons to shift slightly, for markets to open and close, for the rhythm of life to change subtly while a messenger was still somewhere on the road. Communication moved at the pace of human steps or the steady trot of a horse, and the kingdom accepted that pace not as a burden, but as the natural tempo of connection. Understanding how messages traveled also means understanding how medieval people perceived time itself. Their world did not measure days by clocks striking each hour. Instead, time was marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the tasks of mornings and evenings, by the sounds of markets, by the movement of shadows across familiar ground. And because they lived so closely with nature's rhythm, the slow journey of a message felt neither frustrating nor surprising. It simply felt right. To picture how long it took a letter to reach its destination, imagine a messenger beginning at dawn. The air is cool, the light soft. They take their first steps with a calm, even pace. A well-trained messenger walking alone might cover 20 to 30 kilometers in a day, depending on terrain. If they traveled by horse, they might double or triple that distance, though horses required their own rest and care. Relay systems could move messages even faster, sometimes covering remarkable distances within a single day, but even these faster routes depended on conditions that no human could fully predict. A simple letter traveling between two nearby towns might take a day or two. A message crossing the span of a kingdom might take a week, perhaps more if the route passed through mountains, forests, or regions where relay points were sparse. Letters carried between distant kingdoms or across regions separated by rivers, uplands, or unfamiliar territories could take several weeks. Medieval people understood this. They expected communication to unfold slowly. This expectation shaped decisions, created patience, and encouraged careful planning. Weather influenced travel deeply. Rain slowed messengers, turning established roads into muddy tracks where every step required extra effort. Snow softened the ground until paths blurred, making each turn feel different than before. Fog limited vision. Wind altered pace. Messengers could not fight the weather. They adapted. If conditions grew too difficult, they waited, in an inn, under a sheltered tree line, near a farmhouse, until it was safe to continue. These pauses extended travel time, becoming small pockets of stillness within long journeys. Seasons shaped communication as well. In summer, longer daylight hours allowed more travel before dusk. In winter, nights came quickly, shortening the day's work and increasing the need for safe shelter. In autumn, fallen leaves softened paths but also hid obstacles. In spring, rivers sometimes ran higher, delaying crossings. Yet messengers had such deep familiarity with these cycles that the seasonal shifts rarely surprised them. They understood that time on the road was not fixed. It breathed with the natural world. Terrain played a quiet but constant role in determining a message's speed. Flat farmland offered steady walking. Forest paths required careful steps and slower movement. Hills demanded endurance during climbs and delicate footing on descents. River valleys guided messengers gently, but sometimes lengthened the journey to follow the water's winding shape. Open plains exposed travelers to wind, while mountains demanded caution and attention. Every stretch of land carried its own tempo, and messengers learned to match it. Relay systems changed the nature of time. While a single messenger might take days to cover a long route, a relay could move a message rapidly from one point to another. A letter might leave a town in the morning, pass through several hands by midday, and arrive in a distant settlement before dusk. But relays required coordination. Not every region had enough participants to maintain such rapid communication. In quieter areas, where towns stood far apart, messages still traveled slowly, carried by one person following long, quiet roads. Receiving a message was therefore a moment of significance, especially when the sender lived far away. People listened for news of approaching messengers. A familiar footstep, the sound of a horse's hooves, a knock on the door, or a soft greeting in the evening. When a messenger arrived, it felt like time itself had crossed the distance, delivering not only words but the journey those words had taken. The letter's folds, its seal, even its creases revealed clues about its path. The slow pace of communication influenced how medieval people made decisions. Leaders planning trade or governance allowed time for replies. Families sending news to loved ones accepted that weeks might pass before receiving a response. Travelers rode ahead to announce their approach long before they themselves reached the destination. This rhythm encouraged patience, foresight, and a sense of calm coordination. There was no expectation of immediate exchange. Instead, communication unfolded like a quiet conversation across great distances, each message taking its turn, each reply respecting the time required. Communication delays also shaped storytelling. Because news traveled slowly, distant events existed in layers of uncertainty until confirmed by messengers. Rumors and early reports might drift into towns like faint echoes of something happening far away. A messenger's arrival with a sealed letter brought clarity, grounding hearsay in deliberate words. This made messages even more valuable. They represented truth delivered across time. Messenger fatigue also influenced timing. Even the most experienced traveler needed rest. They balanced their pace to avoid exhaustion. A tired messenger risked making errors, losing direction, damaging the message, or delaying the journey through overexertion. Knowing this, messengers moved steadily rather than hurriedly. Their timing respected human limits. Occasionally, situations called for urgency. When a message needed to reach its destination quickly, perhaps carrying important instructions or warnings, the sender might request a faster route. In such cases, messengers switched horses at relay points, rested only briefly, or coordinated with others to ensure the message never stopped moving. Even then, urgency had its own rhythm. Speed increased, but not recklessly. Messengers still respected the obstacles of terrain and weather. The message moved as fast as the world allowed. Interestingly, the slow pace of long-distance communication strengthened the meaning of written words. Because messages took time to travel, people expressed themselves deliberately. They wrote with clarity, care, and thoughtfulness, knowing their words might be read days or weeks after being written. This thoughtful approach shaped the emotional tone of letters. Replies also carried the texture of time, not immediate reactions, but measured responses formed after reflection. The correspondence felt like a woven fabric of patience. The community also adjusted to the pace of communication. Markets, town meetings, and local decisions adapted to the time it took for news to arrive. People learned to function with incomplete information. They valued local knowledge and made decisions based on what was available at the moment, knowing fuller news would come eventually. When a messenger finally arrived with new information, it could gently shift plans, resolve uncertainty, or update understanding. For many medieval people, the flow of time itself followed the rhythm of communication. Days passed one by one while the message traveled. A week felt different when waiting for news. Some people found comfort in the waiting, a reminder that life unfolded slowly with natural pauses. Others felt anticipation, imagining where the messenger might be at that moment. Crossing a stream, climbing a hill, resting in a sheltered clearing, speaking with someone at a relay point. Letters carried across great distances often arrived with faint physical traces of the journey. A crease worn from a relay messenger's grip, a slight dryness from traveling through warm regions, a hint of wood smoke absorbed from nights spent near hearths. These marks became part of the letter's story. Recipients sometimes touched them gently, imagining the route the message had taken. The slow pace of communication also preserved a sense of mystery. People did not know precisely when a letter would arrive. Instead, they listened for news, watching the horizon or waiting for footsteps on a familiar path. This uncertainty, rather than causing anxiety, felt natural, a reflection of how large the world was and how deeply time was intertwined with distance. Messengers themselves became travelers through time as much as through land. They witnessed fields changing colors across seasons, rivers rising and falling, inns growing quieter or busier depending on the time of year. Their work unintentionally recorded the passage of time across regions, though they rarely thought of themselves this way. They simply moved at the pace required, letting time shape their days. Every message that crossed a medieval kingdom moved not through empty space, but through a living landscape shaped constantly by weather, terrain, and the gentle unpredictability of the natural world. A messenger might leave home under clear skies and find themselves walking through mist by midday, across muddy paths by afternoon, and under a quiet canopy of stars by evening. Each journey carried its own set of challenges, yet messengers learned to navigate them with steady patience and quiet practicality. Their relationship with nature was not one of struggle, but of understanding, a respectful cooperation between human movement and the environment through which they traveled. To appreciate how messengers delivered letters across entire kingdoms, we must imagine the world as they experienced it, not through maps or measured distances, but through the textures beneath their feet, the shifts of light above them, the feeling of wind against fabric, and the distinct sounds of different landscapes. Their path was shaped as much by the land as by their own determination. Weather was one of the most constant influences on a messenger's journey, and one of the least predictable. Rain was perhaps the most common challenge. A gentle rain softened the air and cooled long walks, but heavier rainfall transformed familiar paths into uneven routes. Dirt roads turned to deep mud that clung stubbornly to boots. Stones became slippery. Wooden bridges glistened with moisture, requiring cautious steps. Messengers moved more slowly during rain, conserving energy while ensuring the message remained dry. Cloaks were drawn closer, hoods pulled forward, pouches tightened to protect the letter within. The sound of rain tapping against leaves became a steady rhythm that accompanied their careful progress. Snow brought its own challenges. In early snowfall, the world appeared softened, the ground muffled under a light blanket. Footsteps left gentle impressions, and visibility remained manageable. But deeper snow turned the journey into deliberate effort, each step sinking slightly into the white surface. Paths that were well known during warm months became less distinct, requiring messengers to rely on landmarks, intuition, and memory. The cold air sharpened their breathing, and they adjusted their pace to remain warm without exhausting themselves. Snow also slowed travel, not through difficulty alone, but through the way it demanded more energy with each step. Fog changed the world more dramatically than almost any other weather. Even familiar landscapes became mysterious, hidden under a veil of pale gray. Trees became silhouettes, rivers whispered unseen, and the ground seemed to stretch endlessly into softness. Messengers walked slowly in fog, listening more than seeing. The sound of their footsteps became louder, guiding their sense of direction. Running water, the distant rumble of carts, or the call of animals helped them orient themselves. Fog did not frighten them. It simply required a different kind of awareness, a calm focus on sound, texture, and subtle cues in the environment. Wind, though less visible, could also shape a journey. On open plains, wind pressed firmly against cloaks, slowing footsteps. On coastal paths, it carried the scent of salt and the sound of distant waves. Messengers learned how to lean slightly into the wind, allowing it to pass them rather than resisting it directly. In forests, wind rustled leaves, creating a soothing whisper that accompanied their movement. High winds, however, demanded caution. They signaled unstable branches overhead or shifting conditions ahead, encouraging the messenger to proceed thoughtfully. Terrain was perhaps the most fundamental element shaping travel. Each type of landscape carried its own character. Flat farmland offered ease and familiarity. The ground was firm, the path clear, and the horizon wide. Messengers often picked up their pace through these regions, covering distance efficiently while enjoying the simplicity of the land. Fields changed their appearance across seasons: golden in summer, bare in winter, freshly tilled in spring, and colorful with autumn's fading greenery. These changes created a sense of time passing beneath the messenger's feet. Forest paths brought a sense of quiet shelter. Light filtered through branches, creating shifting patterns on the ground. The air felt cooler, especially during warm months. Fallen leaves softened footsteps, yet forests demanded attention. Roots pierced the ground in unexpected places. Moss-covered stones hid beneath foliage. Occasionally, a fallen tree blocked the path, requiring the messenger to deter briefly. Forests also changed with the seasons: bright green in spring, dappled with sunlight in summer, warm with color in autumn, and stark in winter when the branches stood bare against the sky. Hills slowed the messenger's pace. Ascending required steady breathing and deliberate foot placement. The world expanded as they climbed, revealing views stretching across valleys and distant settlements. Descending required equal care. The ground sometimes sloped sharply, demanding a measured, balanced stride to prevent slipping. Hills provided variety in the journey, breaking the monotony of long, flat routes and offering glimpses of the kingdom's vastness. Mountains presented greater challenges. Paths clung to slopes, winding carefully around rock formations. Narrow trails required concentration. Weather changed more quickly at elevation, sometimes shifting dramatically within an hour. Yet many messengers who lived near mountainous regions developed remarkable familiarity with these routes. They recognized safe ledges, stable stones, and ideal crossing points. A letter passing through such territory carried not only the sender's message, but also the silent story of the land's rugged beauty. Rivers shaped many messenger routes. Water offered direction, nourishment, and natural connection between settlements. Some river paths ran smoothly alongside long stretches of land, creating reliable walking routes. Other rivers required crossing through bridges, fords, or boats. Wooden bridges swayed slightly underfoot, reminding messengers to step carefully. Stone bridges felt more stable, but could grow slick with rain or moss. Fords required judgment. Messengers decided whether the water level was safe by observing current speed, depth, and clarity. A shallow crossing invited steady steps across stones. A stronger current demanded patience until conditions improved. Marshes and wetlands were avoided when possible. Their ground sank unpredictably, and waterlogged soil slowed movement. Yet in some regions, messengers knew hidden paths that wound between firmer ground and safer passageways. These paths required deep familiarity with the area, knowledge shared across generations. Animals, too, influenced travel. Horses aided speed but required rest, feeding, and grooming. Messengers riding horses paced their journeys to preserve the animal's strength. They recognized signs of fatigue, slower steps, heavier breathing, subtle changes in posture, and responded with rest. Travelers on foot also interacted with the animals of the land, though more indirectly. Birds signaled shifting weather. Herd animals grazing in fields signaled fertile land and nearby settlements. The distant sound of livestock often marked approaches to villages. Fatigue played a quiet yet significant role. A messenger who maintained too rapid a pace risked exhaustion, which slowed travel more in the long run. Experienced messengers developed a gentle rhythm, neither too fast nor too slow, conserving energy in ways that allowed them to endure long journeys. They paused at logical points, near shaded trees, at inns, beside streams, or in sheltered areas offering natural protection. Resting in nature shaped their perception of the world. Sitting beside a river at midday allowed the messenger to cool their hands and face. Resting beneath a tree offered dappled shade and a moment of stillness. Spending a night under open skies, when no one was nearby, created a sense of quiet connection with the land. Water trickling in the distance, the soft movement of wind through leaves, the gentle hum of nighttime insects, all became companions during these peaceful pauses. When messengers reached relay points, inns, or villages, They also found shelter from weather and terrain. These stops provided warmth during cold nights, dry space during rain, and company after long stretches of solitude. An innkeeper offering bread or warm drink, a family offering space by the hearth, or a traveler sharing a path for a portion of the journey created small moments of comfort that balanced the challenges of the road. In spite of all these variables, messengers rarely viewed nature as an adversary. Instead, they recognized it as a living landscape through which they moved with respect. They adapted their pace, changed their routes, altered their timing, and adjusted their expectations. Their work was possible not by overpowering nature, but by understanding it. This understanding shaped their skill and reliability. The natural world also contributed to the time sense of travel. Messengers learned how the smell of rain hinted at approaching storms, how the feel of air signaled seasonal shifts, how light changed across valleys versus forests. These subtle observations allowed them to predict conditions and prepare accordingly. The quiet cooperation between messenger and landscape formed the foundation of long-distance communication. Without this deep familiarity, letters would not have crossed kingdoms. With it, even the most challenging terrain became manageable. Behind every message that crossed a medieval kingdom stood not only a messenger, but countless quiet acts of support from the people who lived along the roads. Messengers did not move through empty landscapes. They moved through a living network of towns, villages, crossroads, inns, small farmsteads, and lonely houses where doors opened to travelers with calm familiarity. This hospitality, sometimes formal, sometimes spontaneous, formed the backbone of long-distance communication. Without it, even the most determined messenger would find their journey much harder, weighed down by fatigue, hunger, and exposure to the elements. With it, the kingdom became a connected web of shared responsibility and gentle cooperation. To understand the system, imagine a messenger arriving at a small village at dusk. The sky is dimming, the air cooling. A thin trail of smoke rises from chimneys as families prepare evening meals. The messenger steps quietly along the main path, knowing from previous journeys that this village treats travelers kindly. They might recognize a few buildings, perhaps even a familiar sign or a distinctive tree standing near the central square. This familiarity brings a sense of calm. The day's exertion begins to ease. Inns played an essential role in supporting messengers. These establishments varied greatly in size and comfort. A busy roadside and near a major route might welcome a steady flow of merchants, messengers, and riders. It would offer warm meals, straw beds, a sturdy place for animals, and a hearth where travelers could rest and dry their cloaks in winter. A smaller inn, tucked in a modest village, might offer only a few shared beds, a simple stew, and a wooden bench near the fire. Yet even such simple accommodations meant safety, warmth, and rest. Innkeepers understood the needs of messengers. They often kept track of who passed through, ensuring travelers found what they required. Many maintained small supplies for repairs, thread and needles for torn garments, cloth patches for shoes, or spare straps for carrying pouches. They provided information about the road ahead, where a bridge had weakened, which route was muddy, where bandits had been rumored to linger, which towns were busy with trade fairs. These informal exchanges of knowledge quietly kept the communication network safe and efficient. Villagers also contributed in subtle but meaningful ways. When a messenger passed through small settlements, people might offer fresh water, a place to sit, or a simple meal. They might direct the messenger to the next safe rest point, warn them of weather changes, or share local news that might affect their travel. These gestures came not from obligation, but from a long-standing culture of supporting travelers, especially those carrying letters or news important to the kingdom's functioning. Farmhouses along the road also played an important part. Many were built near well-traveled paths, and their residents recognized the weary look of a messenger at the end of a long day. A messenger might receive a bowl of warm soup, a small loaf of bread, or a place to rest by the hearth. Sometimes a family offered a corner of the floor where the messenger could sleep safely indoors. In return, messengers brought stories from other regions, gentle accounts of weather patterns, harvest reports, distant markets, or subtle changes happening across the kingdom. These exchanges strengthened bonds between distant communities, even though the messenger themselves rarely stayed long. Crossroads often had shelters or huts built specifically for travelers. Some were simple structures with a roof and walls, basic protection from wind or rain. Others evolved into small rest stations where messengers could pause, leave messages for someone else to collect, or meet travelers coming from the opposite direction. These stations functioned as informal communication hubs long before postal offices existed. A messenger who missed a handoff might find the letter left safely inside, ready for them to continue carrying forward. Towns supported messengers in more organized ways. Larger towns sometimes appointed individuals responsible for receiving and forwarding messages. These people maintained logs, knew which messengers worked which routes, and could offer guidance on timing. Some towns built designated message rooms or chests, secure places where letters could be stored temporarily during relays. This ensured that even if a messenger arrived late at night, the letter was kept safe until morning. Markets served as vibrant centers where messengers both rested and gathered information. Here they could purchase supplies, bread, dried fruits, nuts, cheese, or small tools. They could also listen for news that helped shape their route. A merchant warning of a fallen tree blocking a path, a traveler describing the condition of a ford, or a farmer mentioning that a bridge had been repaired. This constant flow of information helped messengers adjust their decisions in real time. Local craftsmen also supported messengers. Shoemakers patched worn soles or restitched seams. Leatherworkers repaired satchels or belts. Blacksmiths fixed metal buckles, reins, or stirrups for messengers who traveled with horses. These craftsmen understood the urgency of a messenger's work and often completed small repairs quickly so that the journey could continue without long delays. Even children contributed in cheerful, quiet ways. Curious and observant, they often recognized messengers and ran ahead to alert their families or the local innkeeper. Their presence added warmth to the messenger's day, a brief reminder of the human connection that depended on their work. Hospitality was not always formal. Sometimes it simply meant companionship, a fellow traveler sharing the road for a few hours, offering conversation to pass the time. Sometimes it meant receiving directions at a fork in the road. Sometimes it meant shelter during an unexpected storm. These small interactions formed the invisible web that allowed messages to move smoothly through the kingdom. Messengers did not take this support for granted. Many built relationships over months and years, recognizing faces in different towns and greeting them with quiet familiarity. These recurring connections brought comfort to the long distances they walked. They offered a sense of belonging that stretched beyond any single home, a feeling that no matter where they traveled, someone along the road would understand their purpose. This hospitality also shaped the safety of messenger routes. When villages cared for travelers, the road became less lonely and more predictable. People stayed alert for signs of trouble, helped prevent delays, and ensured that the message remained secure. The community's involvement created an informal safety network that allowed messengers to travel with confidence. In some regions, households placed small lanterns outside their doors during stormy nights, signaling that travelers, including messengers, could seek shelter. In other regions, families offered warm drink during winter months to anyone passing through. These traditions varied widely but shared the same gentle intention: to support those whose work required long hours on unfamiliar roads. The role of inns and villages went beyond physical support. They also provided emotional warmth. After hours of solitary travel, hearing friendly voices, sharing a simple meal, or sitting near a fire brought a sense of human connection. Even brief moments of rest allowed messengers to continue their journey with renewed calm. Despite their importance, none of this hospitality was organized under a central authority. It grew naturally from the understanding that everyone benefited when messages traveled safely. A letter delivered across great distance could affect markets, resolve disputes, bring news of loved ones, or strengthen the unity of the kingdom. People recognized that they were part of this larger system, even if only through small acts of kindness. This chapter shows that while messengers carried letters physically, communities carried them emotionally. Every warm meal, every shared direction, every repaired boot, every place to sleep contributed to the success of a journey that otherwise might have been overwhelming. The kingdom's communication depended not only on messengers, but on all the quiet helpers who supported their movement across the land. As we gently reach the end of our journey through medieval messenger networks, we can finally see the full picture of what it meant to carry a letter across an entire kingdom. It was never just about distance. It was never simply about roads or parchment or wax seals. It was about people, ordinary individuals who walked calmly through forests, along riverbanks, over hills, through towns and villages, guided not by maps, but by memory, instinct, and a sense of responsibility that stretched across miles of land. Messengers formed the quiet heartbeat of medieval communication. Their steady footsteps linked farms to markets, markets to towns, towns to distant regions, and people to one another. They carried not only words, but reassurance. Not only messages, but connection. Every letter they delivered reminded a scattered kingdom that its people were still woven together, no matter how far apart they lived. We followed them through rain and snow, through fog and twilight, across narrow paths and broad roads, into inns warmed by fire and small houses filled with gentle hospitality. We watched as they handed letters to grateful recipients, completing a journey that began days or weeks earlier. And we saw how these simple acts shaped a kingdom, bringing unity, fostering trust, enabling trade, spreading knowledge, and nurturing understanding across distances that once felt impossibly wide. Today, communication moves faster than the blink of an eye, yet the quiet logic of those medieval networks still echoes beneath every message we send. The relay of information, the reliance on many hands, the shared responsibility. These modern systems are built on ancient roots. And though our roads have changed, the human desire to stay connected has not. Thank you for drifting through this peaceful story tonight. If this calm journey helped you relax or imagine the past more gently, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about which medieval topic you'd like to explore next. Your support helps keep these soft bedtime histories alive. Sleep well, and until the next quiet journey, good night.